I'd like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care what progress has been made on improving car park provision. And may I say before he answers that I hope he had his crystal ball, because I had meant to head it Nobles Hospital. So I apologise for that.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've got to say the crystal ball's probably been a bit malfunctioning because my opening line is to say I'm unsure as to the area in particular that the honourable member is referring to. So I was going to talk more broadly, but I will focus it in on Nobles Hospital. Firstly, to say, Mr. President, our principal aim is to provide adequate parking for our patients, which is well signposted and as near to DHSC facilities as possible. It's also that is in good condition, is well lit in darkness and contains adequate numbers of disabled parking spaces. The Department does constantly monitor all car parking areas to ensure they are well maintained and there are sufficient spaces to meet the needs of the service being delivered at the various premises. There are always pressure points throughout the day when demand increases. However, the majority of our areas cope very well with the increase. There is particular pressure at the present around the Central Community Health Centre in Westmoreland Road, and this is due to Manx Utilities Authority working in Ballacameen Road staff car park to repair the drainage system for the surrounding area. The car park is closed for several months, and while the impact is on staff, it has caused congestion at times in the surrounding area and is causing particular difficulty for staff with regard to the collection of equipment for home visits. In relation to Nobles Hospital, which the Honourable Member clarified there when she moved the question, is what it's aimed at. I know there is a perception that there is a parking issue at Nobles Hospital. However, extensive research has been undertaken by the hospital team, and that research has shown that there is always parking available. What seems to sometimes, I think, be the issue is that a lot of people want to park as close to the entrance as possible. And that isn't always going to be the case. So people have been parking, I know, up on the road areas because they don't want to have to walk from the car park to their destination, and that is something we should be looking to try and discourage. So if the Honourable Member does have any particular concern, I will be happy to help in exploring whatever the area is.
Honourable Member, Mrs Beecroft.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I thank the Minister for doing his best with my badly worded question and thank him for his response. Is the Minister aware that whilst I was Minister, I asked an officer to actually look at the car parking because it is difficult within Nobles Hospital. There is often no spaces available in the main car park area. There is in the overflow, but not in the main car park area, and a lot of people who are going to the hospital do struggle from the overflow car park. So there isn't enough provision. If you took out some of the staff who use the general car park, the main car park in front of the hospital, there probably would be. But as I say, I don't know the outcome of that particular piece of work by the officer. But the intention at one time was that a dedicated staff...
Honourable Member, please, this is not a debate about the hospital car park, not a debate. Please put the question and we'll get an answer.
Has the Minister received the report from the officer, and if he could comment on the contents of that report and what he will be doing to improve the main area in front of the hospital for people who find it too difficult to use the overflow car park?
Thank you, Mr. President. I did get the gist of what the Honourable Member's talking about there. In relation to car parking, I think one of the things we need to focus into, which I've raised with the officer team in the last few weeks, is in relation to disabled bays and do we have enough adequate provision for those who can't move long distances. Car parkings, I think, and I am aware of the Honourable Member for Douglas South and what she raised when she was a minister, and that work did progress, but it threw up a few difficulties as well, because obviously if there's going to be a separate staff car park, it's where specifically you locate that and also how you police it. Because if you've got a separate staff car park, you don't really want members of the public parking in the staff car parking, and equally you want to ensure that members of the staff are using that car park rather than the public car park. There's been various things suggested over the years. None of them have really found favour. The idea of charging for car parking up at the hospital, I must say personally I'm not in favour of that. I think that comes with its own problems in terms of enforcement, people turning up, being admitted turning up at A&E, getting admitted, and then by the time the family comes to actually get the car, then they've received a huge fine. So I think there is massive issues. I think what we need to do is ensure that those that need the best help, which is those that are driving with disabled badges, have the closest parking spaces to the doors. I think it's just one of those issues, Mr. President, we're never ever going to please everyone with.
Remember, Mr. Cretney.
Yes, my point, Mr. President, was to ask the Minister, expanding on the question that he's just responded to, surely there must be an ability for people who may have temporary limited mobility problems to have an area set aside for them, just as we have for people with a permanent disability close to the hospital, because by the very nature of the premise, that's why it should be there.
Thank you, Mr. President. It would be very easy to put that aside, but how you would police it and stop the abuse of such an area and confirm that the people using it are those of limited ability, that is the biggest issue.
Honourable Member Mr. Baker.
Thank you, Mr. President. Is the Minister satisfied that Nobles Hospital car park is being used by patients, visitors and staff with a genuine need to visit Nobles Hospital, or is it potentially being used as a wider park and ride facility for Douglas? And if the latter is the case, does he feel that there should be a wider review linked to transport strategies into Douglas?
Thank you, Mr. President. In relation to the Honourable Member for Michael's question, I think there's always going to be people who will abuse the system. I'm sure there are people that will park up the hospital, then go into Douglas for work for the day and then come back. But I think, completely churning the whole system on its head for a few people, and I do believe it's a few people, would not be the right thing. In terms of wider transport links into Douglas, I don't want to step onto the Minister for Infrastructure's toes, so I'll leave the Honourable Member to consult with the Minister for Infrastructure over that.
Supplementary, Mr. Hooper.
Thank you, Mr. President. My question is actually about reducing demand on the car parking facilities, and I suppose it ties into the comment that was just made about not wanting to step on the Minister for Infrastructure's toes, but seeing as the Infrastructure Department is clearly willing to put on point-to-point services around the island, is the Minister of Health going to be exploring the possibility of a point-to-point transport service from, for example, the north of the island directly to Nobles Hospital?
Drop people off the way to the airport.
It's an interesting proposition, Mr. President.
Supplementary, Mr. Harmer.
Would the Minister be aware that there is now a bus that goes from Nobles all the way to the north and to the hospital in Ramsey?
I'll take the Minister's word for it, Mr. President.